Welcome back to TESOL TV. I'm Amy Sweezy. We are on day one, and we've had so many great interviews so far today here at TESOL 2022. And my next guest, Deborah Short, is the immediate past president of TESOL. Thank you so much for being here.
Delighted to be here.
So I want to talk about a couple of things, but first of all, let's talk about the 6 principles. What is it, and what is your role?
Okay, thank you. The 6 principles are foundational principles for any situation where you are teaching language to someone who is learning the language. And they are drawn on what we know from current research about second language acquisition and pedagogy. In other words, what are the best practices for exemplary teaching in the classroom when you have language learning students? These principles have been developed particularly so that TESOL can help new teachers as well as experienced teachers learn additional teaching techniques and have guidelines when they're working in the classroom with these learners, and also finding ways to promote their multilingual assets in the classroom. Now, when I say they're for everyone, I really mean it. They are can be implemented in an elementary classroom, a secondary classroom, higher education, adult education, a English as a new language classroom, a dual language classroom, workplace English, business English,
Wow.
Almost anywhere that language learning is taking place. There are 6 principles, as the name implies, and the core principle is what we think of as the heart of the matter, and that is to know your learners. It's really important to be an effective teacher that you understand the students in your classroom, not just their language proficiency, but also their cultural backgrounds, their other educational experiences, what they're interested in, what their goals are, what aspirations they might have. With this information, you can help motivate them, but you can tap into their interests and make the classroom more engaging. And so when we start with our students, we then have a graphic where we have 4 more principles that go around our students. And those are what we would call the principles for good lesson design and delivery. That a teacher in planning for instruction keeps language learning at the forefront, creates conditions in the classroom, this is our second principle, where the students feel comfortable, where there are supports for this learning of a new language, where they're motivated and they want to be there. Our second principle is actually that writing of the third one, a writing of the lesson plan. What are you thinking about in terms of the objectives? You might have language objectives, but you also want content objectives, because in so many cases, we're preparing students to use language authentically in the real world. It may be for academics, it may be for business purposes, or something else. The fourth principle is having teachers be aware that sometimes you have to be adaptable, or you have to be flexible, that you could have had this great lesson, but something doesn't quite go right. And so maybe you have to reteach, maybe you have to change a task that you planned, but it also means that you are paying attention to your learners, and you're seeing in the moment how it's going and how you can improve the process.
Or maybe you have to do it online instead of in a classroom.
Well, when it's online, it's even more important in that case, because creating that interaction between teacher and student among the students is much more difficult online. But the 6 principles have ways of doing that as well. And in fact, we have a publication specifically for remote teaching with the 6 principles. So going back to the 5th principle, that one is about assessment and monitoring students' language learning. We don't want them just running amok without any feedback on what they're doing well or how they might be able to improve. So that's what that principle does. Have the teacher continually check, make sure students understand, making sure that they make progress in advancing their English language skills. We then have the 6th principle, which in the graphic embraces everything. It wraps around this, and that is for the teachers. It's to engage in communities of practice. And you're doing that for your own professional learning, but also because we know collaboration and co-teaching are valuable, and they bring more energy to the planning and the engagement. And I would say that our TESOL convention here exemplifies Principle 6 to the max, because teachers are here sharing knowledge and expertise and learning from others.
And were these something that you helped create? Is this something that's been around for a long time?
No, TESOL had the idea to develop the 6 principles so that we could all have a common language and a common understanding of best practice. So in 2017, I think it was, we formed a small working group that I was the series editor and a participant in the first book, and we created the 6 principles for elementary and secondary school teachers. And at that point, we focused primarily on U.S. situations because that's where there was a very great need for this kind of information, not just to go with the teachers who are TESOL members, but for their colleagues who don't understand a lot about what it means to learn a new language and have to study school curriculum at the same time. That then blossomed into more of a series of books. So we now, in the next year, published a book about teaching the 6 principles for adult education and workplace learning. Then the year later, it was for English in academic and specific purposes, so more at the tertiary level for higher education, for graduate education, or for business-oriented learning. And then just last year, this year probably, well, last year, 2021, we brought the 6 principles into the primary and pre-primary, so early childhood education, with much more of a global focus. Because we know that English is the most popular new language to learn around the world.
Wow. And I know you mentioned this already at the beginning, but you know, the 6 principles being primarily for teachers. However, there's application for all kinds of people.
Right. So our primary audience were the teachers, those who are in the classroom working with these English language learners. Whether they're the language teacher, the content teacher, the second grade teacher, the college professor. But we see that it, especially when you think about the 6th principle, which is that engaging in a community of practice, in almost any entity that the lessons take place, there's a broader system. It may be one classroom, but then there's a school. There's a school, then there's a district. Or in your college, you're in the College of Education, you may be a teacher there, and so forth. So we also believe that informing principals and administrators and parents about the 6 principles broadens that community of practice and helps them understand as well what kinds of supports they can provide, so the learners, who might be their students, who might be their children, they also have that support to move forward with learning English.
I want to ask a little bit about your role as immediate past president with TESOL. You know, as you finish out this of a 3-year, right? It's a 3-year stint. Going into it, you're president, then you're the immediate past president. What do you take away with you? Like, what's a big thing that you've learned?
Collaboration is key. We had really challenging times during my presidency. I was the first, and gosh, I hope the only president who never presided over a face-to-face board meeting, and we had to have 15 in my year. I was the first president never to have a convention where you go into the position or off out of the position. So we had to learn to work as a team. I am so grateful to have had a wonderful group of colleagues on the board of directors and an amazing staff at the TESOL Central Office, so that when the pandemic hit, we could really, it was intense, but we could work together and look at ways to support and sustain TESOL, because things were touch and go there for a while. So in addition to that, right, just that day-to-day kind of work with the board of directors and the staff, we had volunteer leaders who, despite struggles maybe that were in their personal or professional lives, still worked hard to engage our members, bring everybody together, feel connected. We are a global association, and there are people in all of the continents, except Antarctica, you know, but because we are able to pivot to remote connections, to have that virtual connection, wasn't quite the same as being in person, but that collaboration is what got us through that, and that's what I appreciate the most.
What kind of advice do you have for someone else who might be considering leadership with TESOL?
Well, I'd say jump in, join us. You know, as I mentioned, it could be intense at times, but then it can be a little more comfortable. Things are much better than when I started, so that should be reassuring. I think if anyone has a passion for our profession, that has a dedication to our association, they should really consider running for the board. You know, but if they're not ready yet, there are other leadership positions. They could become a chair of one of our interest sections. They could join one of our professional councils. You know, they might be moving up through the ranks in the affiliates. They could perhaps become a member of our nominating committee. Learn a little bit more about the overall picture of the TESOL International Association, but then come and join us on the board. If you're innovative, creative, and you like hard work, that's what I would say. Come and join.
I've met a lot of those people at this convention,
Of course
you
you
know,
have.
that same mindset. So that's
Yes.
great. Deborah Short, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your time, and thank you for sharing with us about the 6 principles as well.
Yes, it's wonderful to be here. Thank you all for working with us.
Yes, enjoy the rest of TESOL 2022.
I will indeed.